Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zollotech, and iOS 17.3.1 released the other day to the public, and iOS 17.4 Beta 2 released a few days ago. There's even more new features to talk about since the iOS 17.4 Beta 2 is out what's new video, and we'll also talk about the overall experience of both of them on the 15 Pro Max and other phones as well. Not only my experience, but your experience based off the YouTube community poll, where at the time of this video, there's over 10,000 votes and 112 comments. I've read all of them to determine the overall experience so far, so we'll talk about that and everything else in just a moment, as well as when to expect the release. But first, I wanted to mention a couple things as far as Apple news. Apple actually started rolling out the other day with the release of iOS 17.4 Beta 2, App Store Connect and test flight changes. This actually can be seen on Apple's developer website. This is public facing, but you can see the App Store Connect update where they're getting ready to allow the EU to actually use sideloading in third-party app stores. So this is actually the setup for that with App Store Connect, or alternative app distribution, managing the keys for that, and much more. So this is actually already starting to be rolled out, so beta testers and developers can develop apps, get things ready. So once that opens up in the European Union, you'll be able to actually make an app store, make third-party apps, and make those available if you want to do that. Also, one other thing I wanted to mention as far as apps, if you have a Tesla and you recently updated the app, you can now use ultra wideband on supported iPhones to actually help locate the car with the key. So sometimes it was a little buggy if you're using just Bluetooth walking up to the car and it wouldn't necessarily recognize it sometimes. It should now use the ultra wideband antenna to help with that and just make it more accurate. So it should open up a little easier if you were having issues with that before. I never had an issue with ours, but so far, it seems like it's going to help a lot of people, maybe in future devices such as iPhone 16, along with maybe Cybertruck and other vehicles that they're releasing as well. Now, iOS 18 is expected to bring a lot of changes, and I've talked about this in the past, but there was a recent leak that suggests what we thought we already knew anyway. If we go into X or Twitter, and Mac Rumors actually posted from a link on the verifier, which is where this was found, that it seems like iOS 18 will look similar to visionOS. That makes a lot of sense if Apple is planning to unify everything. However, we don't know this 100%, as the more reliable sources haven't actually verified it yet. However, it seems like that would be something they'll do. Whether or not we have round icons or maybe more icons with depth like we do on macOS, that would make more sense to me. But either way, it looks like Apple's going to redesign iOS. Hopefully we'll get some new updates with the Control Center and much more. However, we'll hear more and more as we get closer to WWDC in June. Now, as far as new features in iOS 17.4 Beta 2, well, there's quite a few new ones that I didn't mention in the initial What's New video that's been found since, and the first one has to do with making a phone call. If you're placing a phone call, they've updated the call screen. And if you're placing a phone call, you'll see it now uses the background sort of darkened out. So it blurs the background and now uses the wallpaper instead of just a gray screen. If you don't have maybe a contact card set, it has this background blur again. This looks much better than it did before, and it's been updated with this recently with Beta 2. Shortcuts gets an update, so if we go into Shortcuts and then maybe tap the three dots on one of the shortcuts, tap the drop down and go to Add to Home Screen, we have some new options with a new UI. If we go into the previous version on 17.3.1 and do the exact same thing here, drop down, add to home screen, you'll see that the overall UI is completely different. Now we can select colors, select an image, and even glyphs here as well. So lots of different options where we didn't have any of that before. Also within Shortcuts, they've added a new action. So if we go in and maybe cancel, add an action, we can look for physical activity. So if we go to physical, we can get physical activity and adjust different variables based on that. So that's a great option where we can set physical activity type, clear the variable, reveal the action, and much more. So that's great to see them adding more and more that people are looking for. Now, if we go into a few different apps, they've updated all of them with a similar update. If we go into music, I've shown this before, we have the home button, but the same is true across a couple different apps. So if maybe we go into books, you'll have home here at the bottom. Then also, if we go into TV, we'll have the same thing. It's being unified where everything just has a home button now. So That's pretty nice that it's just sort of unified across podcasts, books, and everything else. I think we'll see this more and more. If we go into the TV app and then we go to search and maybe we're looking to watch a movie, maybe Jurassic World Dominion, scroll down and under where it says how to watch, this has been updated with a new list interface. So it says buy, rent, and then other apps where you can watch it. Something else that's been updated with Beta 2 is a new widget. I showed this before and some people were disappointed because it doesn't have a dark mode. However, it does sort of have a dark mode. If we switch to dark mode, it won't switch. However, if the time where it's actually located, where it's looking at, has now switched to maybe evening time, it will switch on its own. So you'll see the old widget here, the new one. If we go back and maybe go to our time, we'll set it automatically maybe to 9 p.m. a little bit later here, and then go to the home screen, you'll see it changed. So based on where you're located, what time it is, if it's sunset, we'll actually have the icon or the widget change. Where the old one doesn't, the new one does that. It doesn't respond to dark mode though. Maybe they'll update that in the future. But if we switch back to set it automatically, we're back on light mode. Even if we go to dark mode, it doesn't enable. So that's something that's a little odd, but I thought I'd share that. It's something I noticed. Now in the initial What's New video I did, we had the splash screen for the App Store and some other apps. However, one thing I didn't point out and didn't notice until later is it actually says that it's a safe and trusted place to discover amazing apps and games. They've changed this wording as they get ready to allow the EU to have open app stores and third-party apps with sideloading. So they've actually said this is the safe place to be. They're just sort of pushing that more and more. And to go along with that, Apple has disabled progressive web apps in the latest beta of iOS 17.4. They're no longer working in the European Union in Safari. So if you're using progressive web apps, they just won't work at this point. Hopefully they'll enable them again, but let me know if you've found a way to get those to work. Also, one other thing that's allowed for developers in 17.4 in general is they can turn off the hand gestures when you're on a FaceTime call. So sometimes if you gave a thumbs up, it would actually show a different gesture and show some emoji to go along with that on a FaceTime call. They've disabled that or allowed the option to disable it in third-party apps if they choose that. Another update has to do with maps. If we go into maps, within Switzerland and Sweden, they now have the option for cycling directions. So if you want to use it for cycling directions, you can do that in both Sweden and Switzerland now. It's available in other cities around the world also. Now there's some other updates I thought I'd mention quick before we talk about the overall experience. If we go into Safari, Apple released a new Safari technology preview this week, bringing it up to version 188. So if you're testing that out or you want to use it, it's available now. Also, there's something pretty major they updated on Windows this time around. If you're using Windows and you're not using a Mac, iTunes is no more. They've replaced it with the Devices app, Music, and a Podcasts app. So they're all separate apps now where you would have them all together in iTunes. They've done this a long time ago on Mac, so this isn't anything new if you use a Mac, but they did get rid of it on Windows. Also, there's a new design for iCloud on Windows if you go to iCloud.com. So that's all been updated this week. Some pretty big updates. As far as releases, of course, we had iOS 17.4 betas, as well as iOS 17.3.1, but we also had visionOS 1.1 beta 1, so the first beta. I covered that in a separate video, and some people said, well, it's a bit shaky, and you really never recognize or understand how much you move your head when you're looking through this and screen recording. So I'm looking for a better way to do that, but I just wanted to let you know that it does move a lot. You're moving your head as you're looking at different things, and it's very hard to hold still. Maybe Apple will update this so you can record it a little bit better, but I just thought I'd share that. Also, we're waiting for iOS 17.4 Beta 3. Based on what we're seeing so far, I would expect it as soon as next week. So we could have that on Tuesday or Wednesday, so the 13th or 14th, and probably a public release by the end of February or early March so they can comply with the EU. They have to comply with those regulations by then, so we could expect some sort of update sometime in early March, maybe at the end of February. Then we'll move on to iOS 17.5, which Apple is actively testing right now. We're seeing it in analytics. Mac Rumors recognized it in their analytics, and we're seeing that already, and it looks like Apple's testing it. We thought they were for some time, but the major changes will be with iOS 18 in June at WWDC, usually the first week of June. So we could expect that the first or second week, where we'll see the major updates there with a public release of iOS 18 typically in September. Now, as far as one other thing before we get to the bugs and overall experience, watchOS 10.3.1 does seem to fix dictation for those that were having issues with it. When you raise to speak, it seems like it recognizes what you're saying, and people don't have to restart their watch or turn on Wi-Fi for that to work properly. So that seems to be working this time around. As far as iOS 17.3.1, well, it seems to have fixed, well, that keyboard bug where there's overlapping. I talked about that the other day. So if we're in Notes here, this is 17.3.1. If we're in Notes, the text no longer overlaps as you're typing. It's fixed that. Some people have said that the brightness bug seems to be fixed. If we turn this off here, you'll see it lowers and then sort of takes a second to jump back, but it doesn't stutter when you go back in. There's no issues here. We'll go back in and turn on the brightness. There we go. We'll turn up the brightness here, and there's no issues using it, but some people were seeing a stutter with the volume slider and the brightness slider. I haven't seen that so far in this update. Within messages, if we tap in the text box here, go to our emoji stickers or emoji in general, some people are actually seeing where stickers don't show up. So you'll see they're blank here still. They're still blank in 17.3.1, but it does look like they've fixed this in iOS 17.4 beta 2. So at this time, we still have that wallpaper dimming bug and the notification bug in this update. You'll see here, but it should be fixed in the future update with 17.4. So if we go over to iOS 17.4 and go into messages, and then we go into our messaging here, and then we add a sticker, they're showing up. Some people are saying they aren't showing up, but for the most part, if you just tap, they typically will just show up right away. So it's great that it's fixed here. I'm not sure why they didn't fix it on 17.3.1 for some reason. Also, one other thing we have that's finally fixed in this update, other than the emoji stickers, is the notification bug. I've talked about this at length. You'll see it no longer just stutters and jumps in. It's smooth, like you would expect, and it's working, finally working. Apple paid attention, they listened, and it's about time at this point. So finally, we have that fixed. It's pretty minor, but at least they're listening and fixing some things to refine the OS in general. They also fixed the notifications being squared off. I had that issue for a little bit. And there's also no keyboard lag for me. So if we're typing and saying maybe Apple, this is an iPhone, it doesn't seem to lag. It keeps up. It does a great job. No real issues there. So much better here. Also pretty good connectivity. I haven't had an issue despite only having one bar where I am right now. I haven't had any issues with connectivity or Wi-Fi or anything else. Also, the wallpaper dimming bug is still there. So if we swipe up, it just gets a little bit dim. Depending on which wallpaper you have set, it can be very minor. Sometimes it's pretty annoying. Also, sometimes the emoji search bar is missing for some people. So if we go back into messages, if we go in and maybe go to emoji, sometimes the search bar just disappears in this beta. Also, one person mentioned they had their device crash and restart. So not a ton of bugs in this update. There's still some odd bugs in 17.3.1 that will be resolved with iOS 17.4, but at least Apple's listening. As far as the release notes, they haven't really changed that much, so we'll wait for it to load, go into the recent activity, and you can see them here. So we still have a bunch of known issues, of course, with the browser engine, HomeKit. There's known issues with maps and messages. Stickers, for example, might appear blank, so that's a known issue. At least they're aware of it. And then also, we've got known issues with podcasts, setup assistant, and more. Apple will continue to work on this as we get closer to the final version. This just lets us know there's issues currently, and then they'll resolve these very soon. They continuously resolve them as they go through the different betas. It's very typical. As far as the overall performance of this update, so far it's been pretty good. I haven't had any issues using the beta at all. So using the beta, everything's nice and fast with ProMotion. And since iOS 17.3.1 has only been out a day or so, it seems pretty smooth. I haven't heard any reports so far of lag or anything like that. And generally it seems to be performing as you would expect. Even if it's iPhone 11, I showed this the other day, just going into apps, things load pretty quickly. You can switch between things quickly. It works as you would expect. No surprises here, and that's great news. As far as the overall heat, well, I just picked this device up. It's actually cold to the touch, even though it's been on. 17.4 beta 2, since we've been using it a little bit, is a little bit warmer, but let me show you with the thermal camera. We have about 33 degrees Celsius on 17.4 beta 2, and on 17.3.1, it's sitting around 30 degrees. Again, on 17.4 beta 2, we're at about 92 degrees Fahrenheit, and on 17.3.1, about 87.5 to 88 degrees. So both very similar. This one's not doing anything, so that makes sense that it's not really using a whole lot of power or processing anything. But either way, both are staying nice and cool. I've seen most people say the same. Some are saying that it was a little bit warm once they first installed 17.3.1. As far as overall battery life, well, let's first take a look at the cycle count on these devices. So we'll go to About. On the device I use regularly, I have 102 cycles compared to 28 on the device I don't use regularly. So that's what we would expect. At this point, I don't see anything changing as far as which one I'm using. But if we go back to battery health and charging, give it just a second here. We'll go back. You'll see I'm at 100% probably on both of them. And again, here's all the information from Coconut Battery. So that gives you an idea. I do expect this one on the right here with 100 cycles to go down fairly soon as far as that goes. As far as overall battery life, let's first take a look at 17.3.1. Thanks to Cameron for sending this in. This is on an iPhone 15 Pro Max with 98% battery health. He had 2 hours and 8 minutes of screen active time, 3 hours and 48 minutes of screen idle time, and had about 67% of his battery left. So it's pretty good overall. Maybe you would get about 8 to 9 hours. Not phenomenal, but it's still better than most people experienced with 17.3 and earlier updates. Most people seem to be pretty disappointed with battery life overall with iOS 17 from the start, but as far as iOS 17 goes, it's actually quite good. As far as iOS 17.4 Beta 2, well, I've been using it since it released on this device, and we'll see yesterday I had 3 hours and 5 minutes of screen active time, 2 hours and 47 minutes of screen idle time. I used about 60% of the battery. Today, though, I've had 1 hour and 58 minutes of screen active time, and we're down to 67% here as well. So it's okay. It's getting me through a day. I would say it's a little bit better toward the end of the day, maybe with 10% more than I had before, around 30% battery. But in general, we don't really know. We have to give it a few more days to see what it's like in general. Now, as far as photos on 17.4 Beta 2, let's take a look at a couple different photos here. You can see what they look like compared to one another. I don't think we're going to see many camera improvements at this point, but let me know if you've noticed any differences here or there. In general, I've been pretty happy with them, though. If you're wondering if you should install iOS 17.3.1, well, I definitely would, just for security updates and bug fixes. Not really any changes there. And as far as iOS 17.4 Beta 2, well, if you're testing betas already, then definitely update. If you want to try it out, it does seem to be pretty stable, but just make sure you have a backup at this point. As far as benchmarks, let's go ahead and run those. I ran them at the beginning here. I got some pretty poor results. Let's see what we get. Benchmarks completed, and on the left, we have 2,951 on 17.3.1 compared to 2,862 on Beta 2. With multi-core, again, we're a little bit higher on 17.3.1 at 7,226 compared to 7,011. Now, based on history, this varies greatly and varies on when you run this, but you can see the history here where on February 6th, it was a little bit higher. So depending on what you're doing, the screen's been on for a while, maybe it's processing something in the background, but it can go up and down by a few hundred, and in general, both are responding as you would expect. Now, as far as what you had to say, let's go ahead and take a look at some of your comments. Samuel Collins, 9611, said, battery life on iOS 17.3.1 is great and lasts all day on my iPhone 15 Pro. Only problem is the wallpaper loses saturation and the notification bug is still there. But other than that, no issues at all. James Steele, 6140, said, iPhone 14 Pro Max on iOS 17.3.1. Battery life seems stable and performance feels good, although my battery health is at 85%. One bug they fixed was adjusting pins and maps for favorites places is fixed. Before, when I moved my pin for work to the parking lot, it would go back to the middle of the building. Now it stays where I put it. Thank you for all your hard work keeping us informed. You're welcome. Chris Parmer, 4983, said, I've been using iOS 17.3 on my iPhone 15 Pro. Battery life is good overall. I easily get an all-day battery life. I haven't experienced any major bugs. I'm not eager to try any of the beta software that may be early in the testing phase. It seems even the public release software is a gamble. Isaac Man, 1870, says, I'm on iOS 17.4 Beta 2 on my iPhone 13 Pro Max. It's great. I love not having the notification bug and the call screen being your wallpaper again and not gray. Travis Sean, 2992, said, battery life on iOS 17.4 Beta 2, iPhone 15 Pro Max, has been okay for me. I seem to stay on 100% longer than normal. As soon as the battery drops down, it seems to drop fast. Other than that, performance is great. Phone has stayed cool even when updating. I do have a weird AirPod bug. My left AirPod wasn't charging inside its case while plugging into the wall, at least according to the battery widget. When I open the case, it pops up, my AirPod's like normal, but even that said my left AirPod wasn't charging. However, I did a hard reset and now it seems to charge fine. It wasn't fully charged as my phone was showing, but now my phone is showing it charging. Tom Schroeder 784 said 17.4 Beta 2, better battery life, fixes Bluetooth music app control issues I was having with Beta 1 by also installing the corresponding watchOS 10.4 beta update, installed on an iPhone 13 Pro Max. Robert Arias 3744 said iOS 17.4 Beta 2 is super smooth, and now much better without the notification bug. Sherman West said, so far so good on my iPhone 15 Pro Max 17.4 Beta 2. Speed is still good for the 15 Pro Max, Wi-Fi and 5G is fast, battery life is good. So that's everything with iOS 17.3.1 and iOS 17.4 Beta 2 so far. If you found any additional features I haven't mentioned, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below, and of course I'll link this wallpaper in the description like I normally do. If you haven't subscribed already though, please subscribe, and if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.